Nagasaki, a unique tapestry of history and destiny.
By 1944, war consumed this vibrant city.
Yet, the spirit of Nagasaki would endure.
An unseen shadow loomed over these ancient hills.
In the summer of 1944, Nagasaki remained what it had been for centuries, Japan's window to the world. A port nestled between mountains on the northwest coast of Kyushu, where ships had arrived since the first Portuguese sailors landed here in the 16th century. For over 400 years, this city had absorbed influences that no other place in Japan had known. Catholic churches built by Jesuit missionaries, Buddhist temples of Chinese architecture, the old Dutch quarter of Dejima. A city of approximately 240,000 people living under the shadow of war, unaware that in less than a year, it would become the second nuclear target in history, chosen at the last moment when clouds covered Kokura, the original target. In this video, I use modern artificial intelligence tools to bring historic paintings, maps, and engravings to life, shifting perspectives, changing camera angles, and moving through these scenes in ways their original artists never could have imagined. The goal is not just to look at the past, but to step into it, to walk through Nagasaki as it once was, and imagine what it might have felt like to stand here. From its cosmopolitan origins to the eve of destruction. And if you stick around until the end, we'll compare these same locations to how they look today, to see what time has changed and what still remains. Before we set foot in wartime Nagasaki, it helps to understand how this story began. The first Portuguese ships arrived accidentally on the shores of Japan in 1543, blown off course by a storm to the island of Tanegashima. 6 years later, the Jesuit missionary Francis Xavier landed in Kagoshima to found the first Christian mission. The Portuguese soon established formal trade routes through the port of Nagasaki, and by 1570, the feudal lord Omura Sumitada, converted to Christianity, handed the port over to the Jesuits. For decades, Nagasaki prospered as a center of trade and faith, known as the Rome of Japan, where tens of thousands of Japanese converted to Catholicism. The port of Nagasaki stretches along a deep bay that forms the best natural harbor on the island of Kyushu. Mountains surround the city on three sides, creating a narrow industrial valley where factories and residences were built alongside each other with no definite urban plan. In 1944, the Mitsubishi shipyards dominated the port area, where warships, torpedoes, and military equipment were built. The battleship Musashi, one of the largest ever constructed, had left these shipyards just 2 years earlier. For the workers who arrived at the factories each morning, the sound of hammers on steel and the smoke from the chimneys were as familiar as the smell of the sea. This is Dejima, the small fan-shaped artificial island that served as the only point of contact between Japan and the West for over 200 years of isolation. Built in 1636 to confine Portuguese traders, the island passed to the Dutch in 1641 after the Portuguese were expelled. Throughout that time, while the rest of Japan remained closed to the outside world, employees of the Dutch East India Company lived here under strict surveillance, trading silk, spices, and scientific knowledge. The books on medicine, astronomy, and physics that entered through Dejima transformed Japanese thought for generations. In 1944, the island had already been absorbed by urban expansion, but the memory of what it represented, that unique window to the world, remained in the city's identity. Here stands Urakami Cathedral, the largest Christian building in East Asia until its destruction. Construction began in 1895, after the Japanese government finally lifted the ban on Christianity that had lasted over 2 centuries. The Catholics of Urakami, descendants of the hidden Christians who had preserved their faith in secret through generations of persecution, deliberately purchased the land where the Fumi-e interrogations had been carried out. Annual ceremonies where those suspected of Christianity were forced to trample on sacred images. The twin towers, standing 64 meters tall, were completed in 1925, crowning 3 decades of devoted work. In August 1945, the cathedral stood just 500 meters from the hypocenter of the atomic explosion. Of the approximately 15,000 Christians living in the district, more than 10,000 would die. The Spectacles Bridge crosses the Nakashima River in the heart of the historic center. Built in 1634 by a Chinese monk from the nearby Kofukuji Temple, it is the oldest stone arch bridge in Japan. Its name comes from the reflection of its 2 arches in the water, which create the illusion of a pair of eyeglasses. Over the centuries, the bridge has survived floods, earthquakes, and eventually the atomic bomb. In peacetime, residents walked here among shops and restaurants, buying the famous castella, the Portuguese-influenced sponge cake that had become a local specialty. In 1944, with wartime restrictions and food rationing, those days seemed to belong to another era. Climbing the hills of Minami Yamate, the western mansions of the old foreign settlement command views of the harbor. The most famous is Glover House, built in 1863 for Thomas Blake Glover, a Scottish merchant who arrived in Nagasaki at 21 years of age. Glover sold weapons and ships to the clans that would eventually overthrow the shogunate, helped found what would become Kirin Brewery, and contributed to establishing the Mitsubishi shipyards. His house, the oldest surviving Western-style wooden structure in Japan, combines British chimneys with Japanese tiles, an architectural fusion that reflects Nagasaki's hybrid identity. Local legend associates this place with the tragic heroine of Puccini's opera, though Madame Butterfly is fiction. Near Glover House stands Ura Church, the oldest Catholic church in Japan. Built in 1864 by French missionaries, the Gothic-style building was dedicated to the 26 martyrs of Japan, the Christians crucified in Nagasaki in 1597 by order of Toyotomi Hideyoshi. A month after its consecration, in March 1865, a group of Japanese approached Father Petitjean and confessed their Christian faith, revealing that they had preserved their beliefs in secret for over 250 years. This moment, known as the discovery of the Christians, shocked the Catholic world. The church survived the atomic bomb with significant but repairable damage, and today is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Sofukuji Temple stands apart from any other temple in Japan for its purely Chinese architecture. Built in 1629 for the Chinese residents of Nagasaki, the temple belongs to the Obaku school of Zen Buddhism. Its entrance gate, the Ryugumun, or Gate of the Dragon Palace, painted bright red, was originally built in 1673. The main hall was designed and cut in China before being shipped to Nagasaki and assembled here in 1646. In the temple grounds stands a huge cauldron that the monks used to feed up to 3,000 people a day during the famine of 1681. The temple represents the other side of Nagasaki's cosmopolitan identity, the Chinese influence that arrived through centuries of trade. Sano Shrine sits about 800 meters southeast of what would become the hypocenter. 2 enormous camphor trees, over 400 years old, flank the entrance to the shrine. In August 1945, the atomic blast stripped all their leaves and branches, leaving the trunks charred and split. They appeared dead. But months later, new buds began to appear. The trees, against all odds, survived. Also partially surviving was one of the shrine's torii gates. The explosion knocked down one of its columns, but the other remained standing, keeping the gate upright but effectively broken in half. Today, both the trees and the one-legged torii remain as living testimonies to destruction and rebirth. In the daily life of 1944, high school students no longer attended regular classes. Labor mobilization had sent them to the factories, where they assembled torpedoes, welded metal parts, and performed work that adults now sent to the front had done before. At Shinsei Gakuin College, a Christian mission school, morning worship services had been suspended under pressure from the military government. English classes continued, though the language was officially called the enemy tongue. American missionaries had departed years earlier. Students made vocabulary cards with English words on one side and Japanese on the other, not knowing when they might be able to use that knowledge again. Electric streetcars continued running through the main streets, carrying workers to the Mitsubishi factories each morning. Rice rationing was strictly controlled by district, with local officials keeping monthly records of who was entitled to receive their portion. The houses of Nagasaki, almost without exception, were built of wood with wooden frames, walls with or without plaster, and tile roofs, a lightweight construction style that had evolved over centuries, but would prove devastatingly vulnerable to fire. In the industrial valley, residences had been built as close to the factories and to each other as was physically possible, with no separation between commercial, industrial, and residential zones. By August 1944, Nagasaki had already been attacked by conventional bombers. The bombings would continue 5 more times before the war's end. But the city was not on the original target list for the new weapon the United States was secretly developing. Hiroshima, Kokura, Niigata, and Kyoto were the primary candidates. Kyoto was removed from the list because the American Secretary of War had vacationed there and appreciated its cultural value. Nagasaki was added as an alternate target. On August 9, 1945, when the B-29 bomber Boxcar took off with Fat Man in its hold, the primary target was Kokura, but clouds covered the city. After 3 unsuccessful passes, the plane headed for the secondary target. Imagine walking through the streets of Nagasaki in that summer of 1944. The smell of the sea mixed with factory smoke, the sound of hammers in the shipyards, streetcars passing by, women lining up for rations, students walking toward munitions plants instead of classrooms, church bells that no longer rang, Buddhist temples where monks prayed for victory, a city that had been for centuries the meeting point between East and West, now closed in on itself in war. No one knew what was coming. No one could have known. Now I want to bring you into the present and show you how these places look today. Thanks for being here, and if you have ideas or requests for future cities, share them in the comments. Let's get into it. Urakami Cathedral was rebuilt in 1959, following the original design but in reinforced concrete. In 1980, red bricks were added to the facade to restore its original appearance. The charred statues of the saints and the surviving head of the Virgin Mary are displayed on the cathedral grounds and in the Atomic Bomb Museum. The bell that survived the blast still rings twice a day. Dejima has been partially restored as an open-air museum. 16 buildings have been reconstructed based on historical materials, old photographs, and a miniature model that survived in the Netherlands. The city of Nagasaki continues working to restore the island to its 19th century appearance, though the sea that once surrounded it was filled in over a century ago. The Spectacles Bridge still crosses the Nakashima River. It was severely damaged by floods in 1982, but rebuilt using the original recovered stones. Visitors still search for the heart-shaped stones hidden in the river walls, which legend says bring good luck in love. The camphor trees at Sano Shrine are today so lush and full that it's hard to believe they were once given up for dead. The one-legged torii remains exactly as it stood after the explosion, a silent reminder. There are 50 surviving atomic bomb trees in Nagasaki, all carefully preserved as natural monuments. Glover House and the surrounding mansions now form Glover Garden, an open-air museum that attracts nearly 2 million visitors a year. Ura Church, restored after war damage, was the first Western-style building to be designated a National Treasure of Japan and is now a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Nagasaki today is a city of nearly 400,000 people, larger than before the war. Streetcars still run through the same streets. The Mitsubishi shipyards continue operating. Peace Park stands where the most densely populated industrial valley once stood. Every August 9th, at 2 minutes past 11 in the morning, the bells ring and the city observes a moment of silence. I do really appreciate you watching this until the end. Your ideas, comments, and constructive feedback really do shape what comes next. Feel free to leave a comment below. Until next time.